Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by BetDSI. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC 225 event, which takes place in Chicago, Illinois. If you're unfamiliar with our format, Nick and I will break down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Looking back at our last event, we lost 1 unit for UFC Fight Night 131 on our free bet, which was Des Green inside the distance prop. Back to the present, UFC 225 features a 13-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass, Fox Sports 1, and pay-per-view this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking things off on Fight Pass is a featherweight contest between Mike Santiago, who is 21-11, and Dan Ige, who is 8-2. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Opening betting odds for this fight, Ige was at minus 260. The comeback on Santiago at plus 180. And right now, looking over their sponsored sportsbook, betdsi.eu. Make sure you guys always check out BetDSI. It's a great sportsbook to get down on some fights. Right now, over at DSI, Ige's minus 145. The comeback on Santiago is at plus 115. So needless to say, the action came in early on Santiago. And understandably so. I mean, the line was definitely set a little bit high there at minus 260. Stylistically, if you look at some of the last couple fights for Santiago, I mean, Ige should be kind of a difficult matchup for him. So maybe that's what they were thinking a little bit, because Santiago lost to guys that were basically looking to grind him out a little bit, pushing a high pace. Ige's that type of wrestler, grappler, well-rounded fighter. Don't get me wrong. He's got some good boxing as well. Just a very versed, well-rounded fighter. Both these guys are. I mean, they're skilled in all areas, but Ige is the kind of guy that's going to kind of push forward, look for some takedowns along the way more so. So he's another one kind of in that blueprint that just beat Santiago, but honestly, this is a step down. I mean, Santiago has faced better competition. Burnell, we've seen even recently against Arnold Allen. I know he ended up getting caught in that fight, but he looked really good. Burnell, since he made that weight drop, showed us he's legit, and he's a legit grappler. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad loss for Santiago at this point. And before that, I mean, Magomed Shapirov, for crying out loud, the guy's one of the best prospects in the entire sport right now. So that's a pretty understandable loss as well. So what I'm saying is they haven't exactly done Santiago any favors thus far in his career. And this is actually a step down in Ige. And I'm not going to try to disrespect Ige like that, because he's a very talented fighter. But I think Santiago is going to be far more competitive than he was in his first 2 UFC fights here. And then, of course, Ige, he had a pretty good fight on the Dana White Contender Series. That's what got him his shot into the UFC. He lost a respectable performance against Arce, but Arce is just a beast in his own right. So again, he fought a good competitor that I think Arce is going to continue to move up that ladder. So it wasn't a bad loss for Ige as well. Now these guys are matching up, kind of a step down again for both, but I think it's going to be a tougher fight for Ige. I don't think he's going to be able to manhandle Santiago as much as he would like. I think the standing up game is going to be pretty close. I think Santiago is probably going to be the more effective striker in this spot, and I think he's going to be able to sprawl and brawl enough to keep the fight upright as well. So I'm actually leaning a little bit more towards Santiago myself, so I do agree with the early dog action, especially at that price of plus 180. There's no doubt it was dog or pass, so I get it, and I think Santiago still actually is going to pull off the victory here in what should be a pretty competitive fight, and both these guys are very solid. So I think it's going to be a tough test for both guys, but I just lean a little bit more towards Santiago right now.
And I'm right with you. Santiago faced some pretty tough opponents in his first 2 UFC fights, obviously, especially with Zabit. And then, Mads Burnell is pretty underrated. I mean, he has a strong grappling game, pretty good wrestling, and he was just able to overpower Santiago. Ige, while he does have a bit more of a wrestling ground focus, I don't think his wrestling is as good as Burnell's. I think that he probably will be able to get a couple takedowns, but I don't think he can keep Santiago down. Plus, Santiago does have a pretty solid ground game as well, so he might be able to catch Ige in something when the fight does go to the floor, and if it does. On the feet, Santiago is going to have a big advantage. I think He hits way harder. He is a more diverse striker, a more technical striker. He should be able to light Ige up during standing exchanges. My main concern is that Santiago exposes himself a little bit by overcommitting on the stand-up and then opening up easy takedown opportunities. That being said, I just am not that impressed with what I've seen out of Ige. I think that he's a decent fighter, but I think he's also the worst fighter that Santiago's faced so far in the UFC, and Santiago's better than what we've seen as a solid veteran. So I think that Santiago does stuff enough takedowns to keep this fight upright long enough to do some serious damage on the feet. I don't know if Santiago can get a knockout. He might, but I think he at least does enough to win rounds and stay upright long enough to win at least a decision. So my pick is also going to be Mike Santiago. Now moving up to the lightweight division, we have Clay Guida, who is 34-14, taking on Charles Oliveira, who is 22-8 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Oliveira opens minus 185. The comeback on Guida plus 145. Right now over at BetDSI, it's minus 160 for Oliveira. Comeback on Guida plus 130. So opener for this fight was actually pretty decent. Tough one to open kind of because Oliveira is stepping in on short notice. And for some reason his fights, you just never know with Oliveira. I mean, he's such a talented fighter, but he's inconsistent at times. And Guida has been looking really good as of late as well. It's almost like he's had a resurgence in his career. So this is going to be an interesting and intriguing fight. Now, on the feet, Oliveira is going to obviously enjoy some length. He's going to have the reach advantage over Guida. And his stand-up game is continuing to get better fight by fight. But Guida's stand-up game has actually been pretty impressive. I mean, if you look back, even going back to the Ortega fight where he ended up losing that fight, but he was actually performing up until Ortega stopped him. He was performing relatively well in that fight. I mean, he was on his way to pulling off possibly a pretty solid upset there against Ortega. And then backing that up with his performances against Koch and Lozon. I mean, you could tell it's evident that Guida's striking is definitely improving. He's got a little bit of power. Again, in my opinion, he got a little bit of a resurgence. So I think that Guida's always been one of the best lightweights, featherweights in the world when he's competing out there because of his relentless pace, his wrestling style. He's got tons of heart. We all know that he's just a machine. I mean, he could go, his cardio and conditioning just is endless. So that's difficult when you got that kind of experience and that heart to get a guy out there like Guida. I can't believe he's still actually competing at this level. But for me, it's still hard to pick Guida at this point because Oliveira is so dangerous. I mean, Guida could be winning the fight. He could be winning the stand-up exchanges. Obviously, in this fight, he should want to do that. I don't think he wants to play around on the ground with Oliveira too much. Even though Guida could probably get top position here, Oliveira's pretty slick off his back. Now, people have shown they can kind of take him down and fend off the sub attempts from Oliveira. So maybe Guida can have some success, but I think it's still playing with fire a little bit there. So maybe mixing it up a little bit for Guida, not playing with too much fire and at the same time trying to stand up and just land more power shots and put the pressure on Oliveira. He could get a win that way. But I think along the way, I just think Oliveira's length, his skill, whether it's on the feet, maybe Guida runs into a knee. I know Oliveira's not actually that bad from the clinch. He's got some pretty good knee attack. And Guida's susceptible, obviously, for something like that. And then on the ground, I think Oliveira at any moment could just latch onto something and possibly tap him out as well. So for me as a pick, I'm going to lean more towards Oliveira. But again, his inconsistency bothers me. And there's been times where I thought he should pull off victory and he just let you down. I mean, he has that type of fight. He's the type of fighter that has that quit in him. We've said it time and time again. Hate to say that about anybody, but there are fighters out there that have that quit in them, and you just can't depend on them or rely on them. So, in my opinion, Oliveira is one of those guys. You don't lay the chalk on him here. It's a dog or pass situation, but I do think he's got the skill to win this fight. So I'm going to pick him though. So I do think Oliveira probably finds a way to get the W here in what should be a pretty tough fight because Guida, man, again, hats off to him. He's been bringing it lately.
And with the way Clay Guida's been bringing it lately, that's actually why I'm going to pick him. I thought that he looked pretty good against Brian Ortega in his last featherweight fight. I mean, he was on his way to winning that fight in the third round when Ortega landed a really good knee and finished him in a comeback. And then since then, Guida's moved up in weight, and he's looked great. He took on a guy in Eric Koch, who was big and lanky and dominated him with takedowns and aggression. And then against Joe Lozon, a guy that has a similar skill set to Charles Oliveira, although I would say Oliveira does have the superior ground game, but he's a similar style in terms of build and everything else. Clay Guida, pushed the tempo on the feet and then landed a beautiful uppercut, hurt Lauzon on the feet, and then finished him. So I think Clay Guida has put in a little bit of extra time with his stand-up since he's been training out at Team Alpha Male. I've seen noticeable improvement. He's sitting down on his punches. He's not just winging things. There's actual intent and maybe even a little bit of planning and design with some of his striking. So I've actually been impressed. And if you remember, in Clay Guida's post-fight speech, he said that the TKO wasn't enough. He wanted a clean knockout because he's never had one. And Charles Oliveira might be the type of guy that he can get a clean knockout against. I mean, Oliveira, if he gets hurt, he goes down and he stays down. We saw it, with the way that he just kind of had a little bit of quit in him against Max Holloway. We saw it when he fought Donald Cerrone. There's just a little bit of that when he faces adversity, he kind of looks for a way out sometimes. And I think with Clay Guida, obviously if Guida goes back to his roots and shoots in for takedown after takedown, there's going to be tremendous opportunities for Charles Oliveira to submit him. But if Guida stays standing and continues to showcase those improvements with his power and technique on the feet, I think there's a very good chance that Guida can win this fight standing and maybe finish this fight standing. On the ground, obviously, Guida could just shoot headfirst into a guillotine choke. He's done that before against Thiago Tavares. That was just super embarrassing. And Charles Oliveira has a better ground game than Thiago Tavares. So if Guida is just working the power double game or even instinctively does it, then Charles Oliveira is going to, I think, eat him up on the ground. But if Guida sticks to a game plan and fights smart and keeps this standing and just starts landing heavy shots both to the head and body, I think Charles Oliveira is going to fold up. So my pick's Clay Guida. I think that he gets it done on the feet, but only if he fights on the feet. Now dropping down to the flyweight division, we have Joseph Benavidez, who is 25-4, taking on Sergio Pettis, who is 16-3. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Benavidez minus 260, Pettis plus 180 was the opener. And right now looking over at BetDSI, it's Benavidez minus 240. The comeback on Pettis is at plus 190. So line margins have tightened up and there is two-way action on this fight. Seems like the opener was actually pretty solid here because it's a tough one to bet. And I think it's going to be that way. Benavidez, you would think it's a kind of a no-brainer the way he matches up with Pettis, that he should have several advantages in his fight. And he does. But the problem with me, and it's a head scratcher a little bit, is because he's been out for so long. He's had ACL surgery. So being out with an injury almost a couple years, year and a half or so, whatever the exact time may be, being on the shelf like that at age 33, I don't know. It's in the fights that Benavidez has had throughout his career, he's had some tough competition, the best of the best that he's fought against and done obviously relatively well. It's curious to see what shape he's going to be in and if he has any rust at all and if he's going to look the same, because if he even remotely looks close to the same fighter that he was before he went on his little hiatus because of injury, then obviously he has a solid edge here and I think he is going to defeat Pettis. So, and I'll put it out there right away. I do think he's going to have the edge and I am going to pick him to win. I think he's going to beat Pettis, but I think we're probably going to see a very game Sergio Pettis as he always is, but stylistically, he's going to have to stuff the takedowns. If Benavidez wants to get the fight to the floor, he should be able to. On the feet, Pettis is a little bit more diverse. I think he's a little bit more of the gifted striker, but obviously the speed and the power of Benavidez is also going to give him fits, and I think Benavidez has a little bit of a better chin as well. We've seen Pettis at times, get dropped in fights or whatnot, cause him to get submitted as well before. So Pettis does definitely have some chin issues, although it hasn't really come into play all that much. And another path to victory that honestly Benavidez can follow is Cejudo's last fight against Pettis as well. So a lot of scenarios here play out well for Benavidez. It should be a good stylistic matchup, a stylistic matchup that kind of benefits the UFC either way. Because if Benavidez comes back and gets the win over Pettis, it's a tough challenge that he passed, and he's still got what it takes, obviously, to make a run towards another title shot, possibly. Or if Pettis pulls off the upset win, then that's by far the biggest the biggest win of his career, and they could kind of fast track him again towards a title shot, possibly as well for Pettis. So even though he just lost to Cejudo, so a lot of good things. I think it's a win-win scenario for the UFC. Either way this plays out. I think it's difficult again at the betting window because we don't really know what kind of Benavidez we're going to see here. Again, I think he's been battle tested through all the wars that he had, all these years at the top of the food chain, at the top of the division. I don't know. Part of me doesn't trust him right now. So we have to see what he looks like coming back against a very game opponent, Pettis. So the pick is Benavidez, but at the betting window, it's another probably dog or pass situation, but my head tells me more of a pass than anything else here. So be careful if you bet this fight.
The only concern I have with Joseph Benavidez is the fact that he's been out of action for a while, and it was because of a knee injury. But with Sergio Pettis, I just don't think that he'll be able to control the action the way that he likes to. When Pettis is on point, he's controlling distance, he's landing smooth combinations and jabs, and he's able to keep the fight upright for the most part. That's how he was able to get those impressive victories over guys like John Moraga, Chris Carriasso, and then Brandon Moreno. So Moraga and Moreno both ranked fighters, but the problem is that Moraga and Moreno don't really fight with that same intensity and I would say almost reckless abandon and aggression that Benavidez is capable of doing. Like, Benavidez knows that he has heavy hands and he wants to get in your face and land them. He wants to hurt people. He wants to get finishes. And I think Sergio Pettis has a chin that is ripe for getting clocked by Benavidez. Now, Pettis is going to be the bigger, longer fighter. Most people are against Benavidez, but that hasn't stopped him. Benavidez has only ever lost to Demetrius Johnson twice and Dominic Cruz twice at 135. So I just don't think that Sergio Pettis has the skill set to stop Benavidez from doing what he wants to do. Benavidez has that explosive power where he likes to step in and land heavy shots, and then he also likes to shoot in for takedowns. And Sergio Pettis doesn't have good enough takedown defense, I don't think, especially to stop somebody as powerful and capable of being explosive as Benavidez. And I just don't think that Pettis has the power or the distance ability to keep Benavidez on the outside for extended periods of time and pot shot him, because that's realistically the best path to victory for Pettis. Pettis is a very skilled fighter, but I just think that he's biting off a little bit more than he can chew. And this is a tough fight for him, especially after having just fought Henry Cejudo. So I think Pettis is a talented fighter, but I just think Benavidez is a step ahead of him. And I think there's a good chance that Benavidez can hurt Pettis and potentially finish him. So my pick is going to be Joseph Benavidez. I think that he's anxious to get back out there after an extended layoff, and he's a bit miffed after being put on the Fight Pass prelims, considering he's the number 1 ranked flyweight behind Demetrius Johnson in the world and on a 6-fight win streak. So my pick is definitely Joseph Benavidez. Now, moving up to the light heavyweight division, we have Rashad Evans, who is 24-7-1, taking on Anthony Smith, who is 28-13. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Smith opens minus 270, Evans plus 190. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's minus 315 for Smith, and the comeback on Evans is at plus 250. So no faith in Rashad Evans. I mean, he's only lost 4 in a row. It looks like a shell of his old self when he was one-time champion, respected champion, and one of the best fighters on the UFC roster. So it's a shame. I mean, that's what Father Time does for you, for sure. So much respect for Rashad, but I'll tell you what, you guys cannot count him out completely here. He does have a path to victory. I mean, you're looking at two different complete fighters at this point in their careers, because obviously Rashad Evans, as I just mentioned, is kind of on the tail end of his career, on the decline. And Anthony Smith, although he's been around for a long time, in MMA years, he's definitely beyond his age. He still really seems to be getting to a point where he's actually improving in his career, and he's getting better fight by fight. He's improved his stamina. His chin seems to be holding up a little bit better as well overall. And he's performing relatively well. I mean, he's won, I believe, 3 out of his last 4 fights coming into this fight as well, where, again, I said Evans lost 4 in a row. So this is, momentum is definitely more on Anthony Smith's side. So he's a solid favorite for a reason. If this stays standing on the feet, Anthony Smith probably at this point, at this stage of his career, is going to have the advantage on the feet. Evans just doesn't have it anymore. He doesn't have that zip. He doesn't have that power. I mean, he looks a little bit too flat. He's not aggressive enough, where Anthony Smith is going to be able to, I think, to dictate the pace. He's going to probably, be a little bit more aggressive and, put out the work a little bit more. The work rate's going to be higher than Evans as well. So I think Evans' best path to victory here is actually getting the takedowns. Anthony Smith, if there's any kryptonite to his game also, that's still relevant at times, is his takedown defense has gotten better, but it's still susceptible to being taken down by a solid wrestler. And Rashad Evans, I mean, at one time he was that. I still think he has enough left in the tank to probably get some takedowns here as well. And if he does that and he's able to do some work and ground and pound and just kind of make this kind of a lackluster fight and just do what he does best and kind of make it a throwback fight where he just tries to grind out a win here against Anthony Smith, he can do that. So those of you guys that think it's an automatic win for Smith and you're putting him in all sorts of parlays or whatnot, I wouldn't be that confident. I know Smith looks better and he should win this fight. In fact, I am, with all this being said, I'm still going to pick Anthony Smith. I'm playing devil's advocate there for all the people that are counting Evans out, because again, wrestling is the key to victory here for Evans. And I think if he really focuses on that blueprint, he might be able to pull off this upset win and get his first win in a while, a much needed win for him. So this is kind of an intriguing fight for me. I'm not necessarily agreeing with the action coming in on Smith. I thought the opener might have been a tad bit high as well, as where it was actually sitting, and now it's even higher. So with that said, I'm going to pick Anthony Smith because I think they are trending in 2 different directions, but the path to victory is pretty clear for Evans. And if he can show us a glimpse of the past and utilize that wrestling and just kind of try to look and control this fight and stay busy enough to not get stood up quickly, I think he can pull off the upset. So not a confident pick, but I'm going to go Smith here.
If Smith had amazing takedown defense, this would be a gimme. Rashad Evans hasn't won in 5 years. The move to middleweight that was supposed to re-energize his career backfired horribly when he lost split decisions to guys that weren't even ranked in the top 15, or even probably especially with Dan Kelly, not even ranked about in the top 30 in the middleweight division. And now he's, going back to light heavyweight, where he was always undersized but made up for it with his athleticism and power. And he's just old now, and Rashad Evans, in my opinion, this should be a wake-up call. They put you on Fight Pass. You should probably retire. You have nothing left to prove. The only thing that I can think is that Rashad Evans still is getting paid a lot, and he knows that he's just trying to get some money on a paycheck at this point. Because he's clearly never going to be a contender again. He's been in there against the better light heavyweights when he was at light heavyweight before dropping down, and he got dominated. Glover destroyed him. So that being said, Anthony Smith, it's a winnable fight just because Smith's takedown defense is terrible. Smith has only defended 46% of takedowns, and Rashad is probably the best wrestler he's faced yet in the UFC. So I could definitely see Rashad Evans getting takedowns, but will he be able to take Smith down and keep him down over the course of 3 rounds? I don't know. Rashad got takedowns against Sam Alvey and Dan Kelly, and he still lost those fights. Because he is so inactive on the feet now. He just kind of sits back and just loses the round and looking for takedown opportunities or a chance to step in and land a big shot. And he's just become really hesitant. And he's, his chin has never been great, and it's a lot worse now. And Anthony Smith has good power that he can sustain into the 3rd round. He's had some pretty impressive finishes in the 2nd and 3rd rounds. So, this is a guy that can be very dangerous on the feet. And even though Smith is a former middleweight, he was a middleweight that was a big middleweight, a long middleweight. And that has translated with this move to 205 pounds where he's not having to cut as much weight, and he can start to fill out that frame a little bit because, he's got a longer reach than Evans. He's going to be 4 inches taller. So, even though he's a former middleweight, he's still going to be a bit bigger than Rashad. So I think that he can do some serious damage with his hands and potentially, Smith does have a pretty good ground game. He could catch Rashad in something, although we've never really seen Rashad having major issues with anybody on the canvas. So as long as Smith can fend off Rashad's takedowns, and I do think that Rashad is probably going to be waiting for those perfect moments for takedowns, and Smith will have some good striking opportunities. I think that Smith can take the best advantage of those striking opportunities, and I expect him to hurt Rashad at some point and probably finish him. But if he doesn't, Rashad might be able to hug this one out. But I think Smith should be the winner. Now, moving on to the Fox Sports 1 preliminary card in the heavyweight division, we have Rashad Coulter, who is 8-3, taking on Chris De La Roca, who is 4-2. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted at things so far?
Coulter opened minus 190, comeback on De La Roca at plus 150. And right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's actually Coulter at minus 170 or 180, excuse me. DSI has Coulter at minus 180. The comeback on De La Roca at plus 150. So line margins have tightened up to action in this fight. I think a lot of people are just kind of staying away from this fight, not even that interested in betting it, because you have two heavyweights that have a ton of power and lack a little bit of what you would call skill as far as at this level, the UFC level. They both, I think, have obviously started off their UFC careers 0-2. So you could say that, do they actually belong on this roster? It's kind of questionable though, but that being said, they have a ton of power, and if Coulter can get on track here as a favorite and get an impressive highlight reel knockout, we'll see, because I think Coulter has enough skill and he can improve enough that he could possibly, be a little bit more of a steady guy at heavyweight if he gets matched up the right way, put it that way. Now, De La Roca, he's a big guy. He's got some power as well. I know he's had some unfortunate luck, and he's been stopped again twice in his UFC career thus far. But again, he has some physical strength. He's got kind of a well-rounded game as well. So if this thing stays standing, these guys have enough power definitely to knock each other out. But I just think that Coulter is a little bit of a better striker. He's a little bit more consistent, a little bit more steady. If he can keep this fight upright, which I think he will do, he could probably land that finishing punch and get De La Roca out of there as well. De La Roca is stepping in on short notice, obviously, as well. So that doesn't really bode well for him. I know he's been out for a while. It's just everything's kind of pointing for a win for Coulter here. But again, it's another spot where do you want to lay almost 2-1 on Coulter, and he does have some flaws in his defense, to say the least. So I don't know if that's such a good idea. Again, one punch either way can definitely end this thing. But I do think Coulter is the rightful favorite, and I expect him to find his spot eventually and probably get the job done and get a highlight reel type of finish, I guess. So not another confident pick. I think this is going to be a tough fight to bet, but I do lean a little bit more towards Coulter. And, unfortunately for De La Roca, I think he's going to go 1-3 and probably get his walking papers once again after this fight.
Yeah, how weird is it, the career of Chris De La Roca? He went 0-2 in the UFC, did not look good at either fight, got finished in both fights pretty handily, and then after that, doesn't fight for 2 years, more than 2 years, anywhere, and then just an opportunity arises and the UFC goes, hey, you around? Could you fight? And they invite him back. He literally did nothing to earn this third opportunity other than just exist. But he got it. And, against Rashad Coulter, he's going to be a lot bigger than Coulter. Coulter is not a massive light heavyweight. If this guy, really went on the treadmill for a while, Coulter could probably make 205. He weighs in at about 245, and he's not the most in shape dude. And he's, De La Roca is going to be 5 inches taller with 4 inches in reach on him and at least 20 pounds on him. But Coulter at least has been active, and he's been in some pretty exciting fights, even though he hasn't won them. He's also 0-2 in the UFC, just like De La Roca. But, I mean, Coulter was in a fight of the night against Chase Sherman, and then, he just got steamrolled by Tai Tuivasa. But, I mean, that was fun while it lasted as well. So, I think in this fight, Coulter should be the aggressor. Coulter has some good power. He has decent hands. De La Roca showed improved striking in his last fight against Adam Milstead, but, I mean, he still ended up getting smashed. So, I think as long as Coulter can just stay in De La Roca's face, the fact that De La Roca has been out of action for so long, I think bodes well for Coulter. I think Coulter has a good chance of connecting with De La Roca's chin and hurting him and putting him away. So I'm going to side with Coulter, but I mean, De La Roca does have a decent ground game, and if this goes to the floor, it could be De La Roca's world a little bit. So I'm siding with Coulter tentatively, but I am a little concerned about the size difference. Now dropping down to the featherweight division, we have Ricardo Lamas, who is 18-6, taking on Mirsad Bektic, who is 12-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Bektic opens minus 175, Lamas at plus 135. And right now looking over at BetDSI, it's minus 230 for Bektic to come back on. Lamas is at plus 180. So again, line margins have tightened up a little bit. More action coming in Bektic's way. Not really surprising this fight. I mean, Lamas is definitely one of the best fighters in the weight class at featherweight. He's proven that time and time again. The guy, I mean, what more can you ask? He's fought the who's who, had a title shot. I mean, the guy is just one of the best fighters really on the roster all time at featherweight. I mean, he's that good. He's got such a good skill set. He can beat you on the feet. He's got knockout power. He's got finishing ability on the ground. He's got wrestling. I mean, he's a complete fighter. The only problem for Lamas, unfortunately, is, I mean, his chin has let him down a few times throughout his career. And I think that's the glaring thing right there. But outside of that, Lamas is such a tough out. But that's exactly why they're giving him a fight against Bektic, because Bektic is actually the up and coming prospect that everybody's expecting to eventually get a title shot and possibly win that title. The problem with Bektic is he showed a bad chin in his own right. I mean, and his cardio has been a little bit sketchy as the fight progresses. I mean, Elkins getting rid of him and finishing him in that fight a couple fights back for him, I think that was one of the reasons. I mean, him slowing down in the fight definitely mattered, and his defense wasn't as good. So there's an issue. I mean, he's a bit chinny, and again, I mean, as far as cardio goes, Bektic can go 3, but he does slow down more than you like to see, especially for a guy that you would gauge as a future champion. So there's definitely some weaknesses on both ends here. But as far as talent goes, man, I mean, both these guys are so talented. It's unbelievable, like I said. And I actually think Bektic out of the two is probably a little bit better in almost every area outside of the experience factor. And you know, obviously, like I said, Lamas has fought who's who in the division. I do think he's a little bit more aggressive on the feet. I think he's a little bit more effective on the feet overall. I think he pushes a higher pace. I think Bektic's wrestling is a little bit better as well. Pure jiu-jitsu, obviously. I mean, you would think that it would go in Lamas' favor, but I don't think it's going to matter too much here. I think that's going to be a wash. I think Bektic's sub-defense is pretty good. So he's got to be cautious. Obviously, Lamas has a pretty sick guillotine choke, and Bektic might get top position here. So I could see that kind of playing out. He has got to be cautious there. I don't think he gets caught, though. So for me, trusting either guy's chin along the way is definitely a concern. But I think I have to side with Bektic. I think he is a rightful favorite for a reason as well. And again, there's more upside to his game. It was nice seeing him rebound against Pepe as well. And Pepe is a very dangerous fighter. So passing that test, you know, you got to give him some credit for that as well, even though he should beat a guy like Pepe. And unfortunate for Lamas. I mean, it was a brutal knockout that he suffered at the hands of Emmett. Emmett has a ton of power though. So we'll see how he bounces back, you know, and fights another kind of up-and-coming prospect, and Bektic, like we said here, this is going to be another guy that can hit really hard as well. So I'm curious to see how Lamas kind of rebounds from that loss. I mean, in the past, he's done well in a situation like this, so I'm expecting him to show up and fight well here as well, but we'll see. I'm a little bit more confident in Bektic, and I think this is a winnable fight for him. As long as his conditioning and his chin holds, he probably wins it. So my pick is Bektic to get the W here in this spot.
And I'm going to agree. Bektic and Lamas both have similar fighting styles, with both being pretty strong strikers, but they both do have some good wrestling as well and vicious ground and pound. I would just say that Bektic is the younger, just more aggressive and more capable fighter. Bektic, he was one of the top prospects in the planet, until that third round against Elkins when he slowed down and then got caught and finished. And that's his only loss. But that did show a fatal flaw that Bektic doesn't have the greatest chin and he doesn't have the greatest conditioning. And if you can kind of withstand Bektic's attack, there's a good chance that you could be able to put him away. That being said, nobody else had been able to do that. I mean, Darren Elkins is tough as nails. So, Ricardo Lamas, I mean, if Lamas is able to survive, he does have the power and the capability of hurting Bektic late and finishing him. But, I think, Lamas has the same flaw, except for the conditioning, but I mean, his chin is not good. I mean, he's been knocked out in the first round on 3 separate occasions in his career. And, Bektic should have the better wrestling here. I think Bektic can put Lamas on his back. I mean, as decent of a wrestler as Lamas is, his takedown defense is terrible. At only 47%. I think Bektic can shoot in and dump Lamas on his back, and that's probably his best path to victory here, the smartest one at least. Lamas does have a good ground game, but he's much better with his ground game when he's on top position. He's not really sweeping people off of his back very often. I think Bektic, if he gets top position, he can just unload and really hurt Lamas from top position. So on the feet, Lamas should have an edge with his kicking game. He has really started to make that a lot more impactful instead of just throwing spinning stuff and looping kicks. I mean, he actually can do some damage with his kicks. But I think Bektic is just as good as Lamas with his boxing. So with both guys having a bit of a chin deficiency and both guys having a lot of power, Bektic's playing with fire if he gets into a stand-up exchanges with Lamas. It could be whoever just lands that good shot. So I think Bektic is going to play smart here, shooting for takedowns, put Lamas on his back and keep him there. And that should be his path to victory, whether it's by decision or by TKO on the ground. So my pick is going to be Mirsad Bektic. Now dropping down to the strawweight division, we have Claudia Gadelha, who is 15-3, taking on Carla Esparza, who is 14-4. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Gadelha minus 400, Esparza plus 280 was the opener. And right now over at BetDSI, it's minus 525 for Gadelha. Comeback on Esparza at plus 385. So needless to say, more actually coming in Gadelha's way. Stylistically, this is another interesting matchup. I mean, these ladies have a lot of similarities in their own right. We were just talking about that in the last fight with Bektic and Lamas. And you could say the same thing here. Obviously, there's a bigger line here because of, I think, a good reason. I mean, Gadelha, in my opinion, is just a little bit better in every area than Esparza. I mean, I know Esparza has that wrestling background, and that's what she's known for the most. But I think here, a fresh Gadelha, and I'm saying a fresh Gadelha, I think out-wrestles Esparza, honestly, and as crazy as that sounds. I think that the wrestling, even though Esparza might be a little bit more technically sound in the wrestling department, I think Gadelha's strength and her ability to get the fight to the floor is just going to be just fine here. And then on the ground, jiu-jitsu-wise, Gadelha is definitely the better fighter on the ground overall with the submission game. So I think she has an advantage there. On the feet, I think a fresh Gadelha also has the advantage. I think she's a little bit of the better striker, cleaner striker, a little bit more aggressive with it, a little bit more power with it as well. Even though Esparza's striking does get a bit underrated, I think a lot of people don't give her credit enough for her improvements. And I've said it before in podcasts, so she's actually stepped up and performed relatively well. And of course, Esparza does have that champion's pedigree as well that you can never count out. And I keep saying a fresh Gadelha, of course, because we all know, I mean, her issue is her conditioning and her cardio. I think she would be champion, possibly, still right now. I know Andrade, although Andrade did, she put it on her last fight. There's no question about that. That was an impressive performance from Andrade. But that being said, again, conditioning is a big issue for Gadelha because she looked pretty good early on in that fight. But, outside of that, I mean, Gadelha's fights with JJ, she could have possibly won both of those fights. It was conditioning that let her down there. So that's the kind of fighter I think Gadelha is. I thought she was honestly the most talented fighter in the whole division. Now things have opened up a little bit for sure. And a big glaring issue again is that conditioning of Gadelha. That's why she's not at the top of the food chain, in my opinion, overall. So if she fades in round 2 and round 3 in this fight, Esparza will have a window that she could possibly pull off the upset. I think Gadelha could do enough in round 2 to probably seal that round, and maybe she loses round 3. So I think she's going to be dominant enough in the first couple rounds that she does cruise to a decision. I think there's a good chance Gadelha actually takes this fight on the ground and beats Esparza, possibly by submission there as well. So I wouldn't be surprised by that. So I do think she deserves to be a solid favorite. I hope for her sake she gets back on track here. I know she's been putting in the work and she looks to be in decent shape, but we're not going to know until she gets in there and proves that she can go 3 strong rounds here against a very talented fighter in Esparza. So I don't know if the line at 500 is actually a bit high. I think it probably is so. I mean, in most cases, but I do think she wins, and more times than not, I wouldn't bet the dog here in this spot either. So Esparza is going to have to hope that Gadelha starts slowing down and utilize that opportunity to get the W here. Outside of that, I don't see it happening. So Gadelha's my pick, and again, for her sake, and I mean, for us as a fan of the sport, as we all are out there, I would like to see Gadelha get back on track and possibly make another run and get that conditioning issue kind of straightened out, because if somehow, some way she gets that straightened out, man, sky's the limit for her. So the pick is Gadelha to win.
Yeah, both of these fighters have similar fighting styles, but Claudia Gadelha is just clearly better than Carla Esparza just about everywhere. I mean, maybe that tenacity and grit of the wrestling, Esparza might have the edge. But, I mean, on the feet, Gadelha has more power than Esparza. She's more technical than Esparza. She's more active than Esparza. I mean, she should light Esparza up standing. She's more accurate. She has just as good defense, if not better, especially considering she's had 2 fights against Joanna, compared to Esparza's just 1. On the ground, I mean, Gadelha is extremely strong, and honestly, the ground has always been her strength. So I think that she should more than be able to hold her own with Esparza. I am a little concerned that after seeing Andrade, take down Gadelha and keep her down and just repeatedly toss her around, that maybe there could be a chance for Carla Esparza to use that wrestling and repeatedly put Gadelha down and keep her down. But I just don't think that she'll be able to do it consistently. Esparza needs to close the distance and get a hold of somebody and drag them down, and I think Gadelha can fend her off. She's not quite as powerful or as explosive as what Jessica Andrade was able to do. So I think Esparza has more of the traditional wrestling approach compared to Andrade. And I think Gadelha does have conditioning issues, but I don't know if Esparza is going to be able to push Gadelha to the point where she can get really tired. Gadelha gassed against Andrade and against Young Jacek when she was exerting a lot of energy early, because I think that she was a little nervous about a fight going long. And against Esparza, I don't think she's nearly as nervous. And especially with this being a 3-round fight, I think Gadelha should be able to improve her conditioning a little bit and hold her cardio. And I think Gadelha lands some good shots on the feet and fends Esparza's takedowns off and gets the job done here. She at least wins by decision. She might even be able to finish Esparza if she lands something really good. I mean, she does have some pop in her hands. So I'm definitely siding with Claudia Gadelha. Now, moving on to the main event of the preliminary card, we have a heavyweight contest between Alistair Overeem, who is 43-16 with 1 no contest, taking on Curtis Blades, who is 9-1 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Overeem open -140. The comeback on Blades even money. And right now, what we're seeing over at BetDSI is actually Blades at -178. The comeback on Overeem at +148. So again, line flipped and more action coming on Blades. He should have probably opened, obviously, the favorite off the rip there. So tough though, because I mean, you got an up and coming heavyweight again, trying to make waves and trying to prove that he's got a contender in the title, shot pitcher here in the UFC's heavyweight division, which obviously they're looking for new young contenders to step up and have some success and try to claim stake for that title shot eventually against Stipe or even possibly DC, as that fight comes near here as well. So the winner of this fight definitely puts himself in the mix there. And of course, Blades coming off of impressive wins. I mean, his win over Hunt in his last fight was a big test for him. I think, it was a big hurdle he had to overcome with Hunt's power and the ability to to fight smart and do what he had to do in that fight was very impressive for Blades. I think he showed a lot of maturity in that spot. And of course, he fought a very tough old man in Oleinik. Oleinik seems to just be, he gets that choke against most people, as we all know. That wasn't exactly an easy fight. So he's coming off of some pretty solid wins back to back. Now, of course, Overeem's coming off that vicious defeat against Ngannou. Ngannou earned himself a title shot over that victory, and that was one of the best knockouts we'll ever see, period, in the sport. I mean, that was just devastating. And that actually is Overeem's flaw here in this fight as well, would be the ability to kind of hold up under pressure. I mean, unfortunately, obviously, Ngannou, that shot that he landed was ridiculous, and that would knock out anybody. I mean, there's no question about that. So you got to cut Overeem some slack there, but his chin has just been horrific throughout his career. We all know that as well. He's been knocked out so many times, and he's not getting any younger. And then coming from that devastated knockout loss on top of it all, at age 38, when you've been knocked out 12 times or so, I mean, it's not going to get any better for you. So I'm saying all this because Blades isn't really a striker, but one punch could get through and possibly turn things around quickly, because overall in this fight, there's no question who the better fighter is. Overeem is a more talented striker. He's got great takedown defense in most cases as well. So he should be able to keep this fight upright. And then if he does, the better striker should win. But the problem with his chin is kind of scary. And I think a lot of people don't have faith in him, especially, again, that Ngannou knockout that he's coming off of. And Blades has momentum going on his side. He's been fighting a little bit smarter, even though he's not the better striker in this spot. As I just mentioned, all it takes is one to get through and hurt Overeem. And then if he gets the fight to the floor, I mean, Blades' wrestling has looked pretty good when he's needed to use it. I mean, it's been coming through for him. I mean, Hunt's not an easy guy to take down, and he was able to, to utilize the strength there as well. Maybe he's able to get Overeem down. In my opinion right now, I think it's going to be very difficult for him. So I think he's going to struggle getting Overeem down, but we won't know really until he gets in the cage and see if you can implement that kind of style. And if he gets Overeem on the ground and puts him on his back, outside of a guillotine choke from Overeem, I think Blades is going to have his way with him. I mean, the ground and pound that he'll drop, I think he could probably repeat something like Stipe did in that finish that he had Overeem. I wouldn't be surprised there. Blades definitely has enough power in ground and pound to utilize that as well. And Blades is tough as nails. So I don't know. This is going to be a very good test for both guys. We'll see where Overeem is. If he could come back and stuff the takedowns and just outstrike Blades and possibly finish Blades on the feet as the fight progresses, then Overeem does have something left. But here, this is another stepping stone, another title builder, I think, for Blades. And I think it's a test that he probably does pass along the way. So I do have confidence in Blade. I think that he probably does pull off the victory here. Now, again, where the betting line is, though, it makes it difficult, because are you going to lay 2-1? Basically, because that's where it almost is right now. I mean, $1.80, $1.78 to $1.80 is out there. $1.90 is also in Vegas. Almost 2-1 on Blades over Romero. I think it's a stiff test, and that's not really a smart decision to lay that price. Now, early on, when you got dog money on him, I understand it. And when you got maybe $1.30, $1.40 or something like that, I can understand it as well. But when you're getting around 2-1, I think it's a stay away from spot right now. The line's pretty much ruined out there. So at this point, sit back and watch it, and I think you either put a little bit of money on Overeem as a dog, or you just sit back and watch it and enjoy it with Blades. And I think Blades probably does secure the victory here by mixing things up, making this a tough fight for Overeem, and eventually possibly catching that chin, whether it's on the ground or on the feet. So I'll side with the momentum right now. I guess it's more me not trusting Overeem's chin and coming off that devastating knockout, like I just said, more so than anything, and the momentum being on Blades' side. But it's going to be a difficult fight, so curious to see if Blades can pass this test, but I think he does here.
And I completely understand people not trusting Overeem, especially after just that absolutely devastating knockout loss he suffered. But you got to remember, before he suffered that knockout loss, he beat Fabricio Verdum and Mark Hunt. And he's had some really quality victories during his recent run at heavyweight, with his only losses being to Stipe and Ngannou. Is Curtis Blades good enough to join Stipe and Ngannou? And I just don't know if he is. I mean, Blades probably is the second best prospect in the heavyweight division after Ngannou, but he still is pretty raw. I mean, Blades is not that impressive in the stand-up department. He still has a long way to go in terms of learning solid combinations and throwing correctly with power and sitting down on his strikes and just doing a lot of the right technical things on the feet. Against somebody that is a former K1 heavyweight Grand Prix champion like Overeem, I think Overeem can eat him up on the feet. Overeem has a strong jab, heavy leg kicks, brutal knees in the clinch that like he finished Mark Hunt with. So if Blades is screwing around on the feet way too long, I think Overeem should be able to just outpoint him and fight from distance. On the ground, obviously, if Blades can get top position, he's dangerous. He has heavy ground and pound. You saw that against Oleinik. You've seen it in several of his fights, actually. I mean, if he can get top position and use that wrestling and take you down, then Overeem could be in trouble. But you gotta remember, Overeem has very good takedown defense, underrated takedown defense. I mean, he's a big, strong guy, and he's fended off most of the wrestlers he's faced. I think Blades is probably going to have a little bit of trouble shooting in for takedowns, especially if he can't set them up properly, because Overeem shouldn't have too much problem controlling distance on the feet with his jab and leg kicks. So unless Overeem makes a huge mistake, I don't expect him to be on his back. And even if he does get put on his back, I think he should be able to get back to his feet because he is so physically strong and is a pretty good scrambler. And you got to remember, Overeem has a pretty nasty guillotine choke. So if Blades is just throwing caution to the wind and leaving his neck exposed, we could see Overeem catch him with the guillotine and choke him out. So I think that potentially is a path to victory, and I think Overeem can just outpoint him like he did like he did when he won the Roy Nelson fight. I mean, he knew that the only way Nelson could win was if he closed the distance and landed that big overhand right. So Overeem played keep away for 3 rounds and just pot-shotted Nelson, and he still did a lot of damage in that fight. So I think Curtis Blades might be in for a bit of an awakening here. I mean, yeah, he had a strong performance against Mark Hunt when he was after surviving that big shot early, but I think Alistair Overeem is another animal, and I think that Overeem is able to keep this fight upright and outpoint Curtis Blades over the course of 3 rounds without getting caught, and I think Overeem does at least win a decision. So Overeem's going to be my pick. Now, moving on to the main card, we have a welterweight contest between a pair of 0-1 fighters in CM Punk, who is 0-1, and Mike Jackson, who is 0-1, with both of their professional losses being to Mickey Gall. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Jackson opened minus 280, the comeback on Punk at plus 200. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's actually Jackson minus 230. The comeback is plus 180 on Punk. So line margins have tightened up. There is two-way action coming in this fight. And you could tell almost, I mean, Brian, no offense there, but you could tell you were almost laughing about this fight when you were kind of bringing in the intro as well, saying the 0-1 fighters. And you know what? I don't want to disrespect, and it's going to seem like we're kind of bashing these guys in either end. And we're not here to bash any fighters. I mean, if you step in the octagon, if you're competing in MMA, you step in that cage, hats off to you. A ton of respect for you guys out there that are competing and doing what you do. So no disrespect, but it is my job to kind of break down fights and kind of guide you guys along. And that's what most of you guys are listening for, obviously, is to get our opinions, Brian and I's opinion on fights. So it's going to sound like we're fighter bashing sometimes, but we just got to be truthful. And I'm going to start this off by saying neither one of these guys belong on the UFC roster. I mean, it's that simple. In fact, Access TV and LFA Fighting and those organizations and CES and stuff like that, those are the leagues that filter a lot of good up-and-coming fighters into the UFC as of late. I mean, there's more leagues outside of that, but that's been one of the main filters that the UFC's been, getting prospects from, snagging those guys. These guys wouldn't even win belts or even come close to a title on those circuits, especially with their skill set right now. So these guys definitely don't belong on the roster. We all know why this fight's happening. We all know what the deal is. CM Punk, obviously coming from his WWE background, is extremely popular. I mean, he's a pay-per-view seller. I mean, he's proven that already, in his loss to Mickey Gall or whatnot. I mean, the guy can sell pay-per-views in WWE or whatnot. So he's got that crossover appeal, and it's kind of neat to see. So I'm not necessarily against it all the way. The fact of the matter is there's a lot better competition out there, a lot of guys that are better than CM Punk that could be having this slot on the roster, and they're not. And same thing could be said about Jackson. So this is a fight against two guys that are not even qualified to be in this position at all. So with all that being said, this is a fight that CM Punk can win. In my opinion, he shouldn't even really be the underdog coming into this fight. Now, I know that's crazy to say, and there's not a lot to go by on this. So, it's up to you. It's at your own discretion and how much you trust us on this fight, because really outside of the people that train with CM Punk and Mike Jackson every day, I mean, nobody can break this fight down accurately until we see these guys in more fights. But from what we've seen thus far and what we're able to dig up, I think CM Punk is actually the more complete MMA fighter at this point. He's been putting in the work at Rufus Sport now for a long time. I think they've been bringing him along patiently. He's been fighting and competing against at Rufus Sport with guys that are much better than Mike Jackson as well. And I think this is a good spot for him because Jackson does have a striking background. Now, of course, Punk is getting the work at a striking gym, but obviously those of you guys that follow the sport pretty well know that Rufus Sport is more than just a striking gym. I mean, they're a pretty complete gym. They've have some good wrestlers in there. Their jiu-jitsu game's on point as well. They're just getting better, and they've evolved through the years. So CM Punk is getting, I think, complete training. Where Jackson, I mean, he trains, if he's still training at 4 Ounce Fight Club in Texas, that's a pretty good camp as well. I'm not taking anything away from those guys either, but Jackson still seems to be more of a striking based fighter. So I think he's more of a one trick pony. Now with that one trick as well, we both got to see, we saw both of their debuts in the UFC. Jackson got dropped by Gall right away. Gall was able to pounce on him. And then obviously finish him basically with no resistance on the ground there. Whereas CM Punk got taken down by Gall right away. He did show a lot of resistance. I mean, he was there to win. Unfortunately for him, he was just outmatched. Gall just outmatched both of these guys severely. And I mean, stylistically, this is a much better matchup for both guys because they're almost at the same level. With all that being said, I had a little bit more respect for CM Punk coming out of that fight. I mean, he got a beating from Gall. He ended up tapping out, of course, but he was trying to fend off, the submission for a while. He was trying to get out of a bad spot. He did take some ground and pound as well in that fight. And, he has no quit in him. I've heard time and time again that in the gym, CM Punk's the type of guy that he could take a beating and he has the will to win. He doesn't want to quit. And I think that will to win is going to come through for him here, especially now that he's matched up with a guy that actually has a worse skill set than him on the ground, of what I believe at least is the case. So I think he has a path to victory. I think CM Punk's stand-up is going to be good enough here to close the gap, maybe even rock Jackson again. We could see it. Get the fight to the ground. I think Punk's going to get top position, pound him out, or even possibly sub Jackson. So I really think that CM Punk deserves to be a slight favorite in this fight, as crazy as that sounds, because I know Jackson has more fighting experience throughout his career with his striking sports as well. But this isn't striking. This is an MMA cage that they're going to fight in. This is the UFC. I think Punk is going to be better prepared for this matchup, and I think he's going to win. So those of you guys can think I'm funny or whatever, or, a lot of people are kind of counting Punk out. It's not exactly that I'm really promoting Punk here. It's that, Jackson isn't a good fighter. It's plain and simple. So those of you guys that want to lay over 2-1 on Jackson, you guys are insane. I don't care if he goes out there and knocks Punk out right away. He is not the type of fighter you lay 2-1 on. I respect him very much, even as a journalist, and he's kind of one of us out there. I mean, he produces content for his website, so there's a lot of good things to say about Mike Jackson. I respect him again, and I'm not trying to bash him, but in this fight, Punk's going to probably get the W and probably open up some eyes. And after this, unless the UFC brings in another low-level fighter, which I doubt they do, I'm not sure who Punk can beat, but this is a winnable fight for CM Punk, and I think he's going to get it done. So needless to say, I probably spent already way too much time on this fight, and Brian's even going to laugh about this probably when we get off air. But with that being said, I just had to kind of get it out there, and I do believe CM Punk's going to win his fight. He's going to be 1-1 in the UFC after this performance. So my pick is Punk. Go CM Punk.
Yes, I do think that you went a little too long on this fight because, how much can we really know? I mean, CM Punk and Mike Jackson combined got destroyed by Mickey Gall in less than 3 minutes. So yeah, CM Punk survived a little bit longer against Mickey Gall, actually about 3 times as long than Mike Jackson did. But you got to remember, CM Punk, he got taken down, and then Mickey Gall systematically passed his guard and then eventually choked him out. Mike Jackson, he got dropped by Mickey Gall on the feet, and then Mickey Gall just jumped on his back and choked him out right away while he was still out of it. It's completely different. I mean, yeah, CM Punk showed more fight because he still was conscious. So that's the main, disagreement I have here. But honestly, how much can you really know? I mean, neither of these guys deserve to be in the UFC. Neither of these guys are very good at all. Both do train at legit gyms, but, and Mike Jackson has been training longer, but he comes from a striking background. So I would say Mike Jackson should win the stand-up, and CM Punk probably can win the ground. But, how good is CM Punk's ground game, really? I know that he did a little bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu while he was still training in the WWE, but, how much has he really worked on that? And, how much does he have physically? I mean, CM Punk had so many concussions in WWE and so many injuries to all parts of his body because of the moves he would do, which just did devastating problems to his knees. I mean, he did this thing called the Pepsi plunge where he basically did a pedigree off the top rope and landed on his knees. And, that's just horrific. So, I mean, is he going to have the ability to explode for a double leg takedown and take Jackson down and get a submission? I don't know. There's just way too many unknowns here. So I'm just going to keep it simple and side with what we do know, and that Mike Jackson has been training and fighting for way longer than CM Punk. And even though he looked terrible in his fight against Mickey Gall, I think Jackson can outstrike CM Punk. And I don't know how good Jackson's takedown defense is, but if he can keep this striking, he should be able to win. But who knows? I mean, there's just not enough information out there to make a real good decision. And there's just a lot of people hating on CM Punk and betting against him now after how terrible he looked against Mickey Gall, who is a legitimate fighter and went on to actually beat a UFC caliber fighter after fighting both of these guys. So, I think Mike Jackson wins a decision, but I honestly would not be surprised if either of these guys won because there's just not enough that we know about them in their limited octagon experience. Now, moving up to the heavyweight division, we have Andrei Arlovski, who is 27-15 with 1 no contest, taking on Tai Tuivasa, who is 9-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Tuivasa minus 265, Arlovski plus 185, and right now looking over at BetDSI, minus 220 for Tuivasa. Comeback on Arlovski is at plus 170. So line margins have tightened up a little bit. Two action coming in this fight a little bit, and more action coming in Arlovski's way, but there was early action coming in on Tuivasa as well, as we said. So tough one. I mean, we know this is the story in this situation here as well. It's basically another situation or the case where you have the old veteran, that former champion, facing another young heavyweight that's up and coming and a prospect. A lot of people think Tuivasa is possibly a future contender as well. So he gets to try and pass that test over, again, a legit heavyweight legend in Arlovski to put on his resume if he gets that, stepping stone type of bout for Tuivasa here over Arlovski. But Arlovski has showed some life. I mean, I thought he was pretty much past it. I know he went on that little streak and then, he lost to Stipe. He was losing to the guys that, just before that, he was knocking on that title shot door as well. And then unfortunately for him, he lost, a few in a row. But then he has gotten back on track. He beat Struve. He beat Albini. 2 solid wins for him to get back on track. But now he faces a guy in Tuivasa that is looking better fight by fight. The matchups so far for him have been favorable, and this is definitely a step up in class by far. Arlovski, especially how Arlovski's been performing the last few fights, but still, this is a winnable fight for Tuivasa. He's going to be the smaller fighter here. Arlovski's going to be a little bit bigger, have a little bit more reach, probably a little bit physically stronger. I think Tuivasa, though, at this point in his career, and obviously with the age discrepancy as well, being the younger fighter, is a little bit quicker and more explosive. So I think that's what's going to be the downfall of Arlovski in this fight. Is Tuivasa is explosive and quick enough and powerful enough that he's going to probably end up catching that chin. He's not going to be as tentative as Struve or Albini were in the case of Arlovski. I think he's going to come to fight. He's going to come to test that chin of Arlovski, and he's not going to have any concern about taking a shot back from Arlovski. Tuivasa's just one of those warriors that comes to fight and he leaves it all out there. So I know inexperience-wise, this is a big step up, and Arlovski can certainly take this in the deeper waters, possibly if he could survive early on and maybe steal this fight. But that's why you're seeing a competitive line as well, a little bit over 2-1 for Tuivasa. So I think it's appropriate where it's at. It's a good test for Tuivasa, but he does have a path to victory. And unfortunately for Arlovski, I think that chin is going to show up and be exposed again, and Tuivasa is going to land that punch and probably put him out. And that'll be 3 straight finishes for Tuivasa, and he'll probably start getting a little bit too much respect. But if the UFC matches him up accordingly, or matches him up properly, he might continue that streak, and they could turn Tuivasa into a legit contender. But we really do need to see Tuivasa get tested, go into deep waters, fight a full 3 rounds, and get, be in a war or whatnot to see how he performs, because that's going to be the level of improvement we need to see based on some of his previous footage in the past as well. But I think in this case here, it's not going to matter too much. I think Arlovsky probably gets finished, at least in the first couple rounds. So it'll probably be earlier than later. Tuivasa by knockout is what I think is going to happen here. So the pick is Tuivasa to get the W.
My main concern here is Tuivasa just overextending himself and not being able to put away Andrei Arlovsky. If he doesn't do that, Andrei Arlovsky is a savvy veteran, and he already, killed the hype on Junior Albini, and then he just recently won a decision against Stefan Struve. So, if Tuivasa doesn't put Arlovsky away quickly, with the pace that this guy fights and the intensity, I can see him gassing himself out really quickly, and then Arlovsky being able to win the last 2 rounds and win a decision. That being said, Arlovsky doesn't really handle that type of overwhelming pressure very well. When he faces those young up-and-coming guys with a lot of confidence, most of the time they're able to get inside against him and hurt him and put him away. Just look way back when he faced like Brett Rogers in Strikeforce. Rogers just overwhelmed him with combinations and put him away very quickly. I think Tuivasa can do the same thing. I think he just pushes forward extremely aggressively, throwing heavy haymakers and knees. And even though Arlovsky is better technically and has pretty good striking defense, if any of those shots get through, Tuivasa is going to absolutely decimate Andrei Arlovsky. It's just all about the pressure and intensity and overwhelming combinations. Tuivasa lands almost 9 strikes a minute. That is ridiculous in the heavyweight division. It's something that can't be kept up, but I just don't know if Arlovsky has the ability to fend that off. So I'm going to side with Tai Tuivasa. I do think that he can swarm Arlovsky and put him away. This kid is still growing in the sport and still developing, but he uses that crazy athleticism and power very well right now. And even though Arlovsky is a solid veteran and has rebounded with a couple wins, he was just 1 fight away from almost certainly being cut by the UFC after he lost about 5 in a row. So I think Tuivasa can start up a new losing streak potentially for Arlovsky here. So my pick is going to be Tuivasa. I think that he probably knocks Arlovsky out in the first round. Now dropping down to the women's featherweight division, we have Holly Holm, who is 11-4, taking on Megan Anderson, who is 8-2. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Holm open -175, Anderson at +135. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's actually Holm currently at -217. The comeback on Anderson at +172. So more action coming in Holm's way a little bit. But there is, again, 2 action coming in this fight because the line was actually creeping up even higher. So Anderson money coming back in. And this is a tough fight. Experience-wise, it's no brainer. Holly Holm is definitely the more experienced fighter, the more proven, savvy vet overall. You can't compare resumes. Holly Holm is just unbelievable. And the fighters that she's been facing and the title shots that she's had, everything that you can think of, favors Holly Holm here. And this is a striker versus striker matchup as well. And Holly Holm is definitely the better and more experienced striker in this matchup. So a lot of things to like about Holly Holm here, and that's why she's a solid favorite. But Megan Anderson, I don't think we could take her lightly and underestimate her, even though she hasn't faced the competition that Holly Holm has, and this is a big step up in competition. Of course, she's the Invicta champion. She is the natural featherweight here in this spot. She's going to be the bigger woman. She is going to be physically stronger. She has a ton of power to go along with it as well. And she's pretty aggressive as she pushes forward and tries to land her strikes. So that could feed into the hands of Holly Holm for sure, but I think Holm has to be careful because I know she survived against an amazing, powerhouse like Cyborg in her last fight, and she was competitive. So you got to give her credit for that. But Holm, a lot of times, in my opinion, fights the level of her competition. Against Correia, Correia was pretty competitive, a lot more competitive than people thought until Correia got caught, obviously with that beautiful kick of Holly Holm. But that being said, I mean, as you can see, Megan Anderson can have some success at 145 pounds, being aggressive and landing her shots against Holly Holm as well. I think it's going to be a lot more competitive than people think. But Holly Holm is the more experienced, more accurate striker here in this spot. I think she's a better counter striker as well. She's got some power. She's got some accuracy, probably a little underrated power. And Megan Anderson can definitely be hit and punches can get through because she is, I don't want to say she's sloppy at times, because, she does tend to have some clean strikes, punches straight, and with some power. So it's not like she's really wide and sloppy and overly aggressive at times. But her defense, I mean, she's hittable. You can look back at her fights, and she has been tagged. So if Holly Holm gets through and is able to counter and have some success in that spot, it's going to be interesting to see if Anderson can actually withstand Holly Holm's power and accuracy as well, even though Anderson's a bigger, stronger woman. So this is a very intriguing fight. I think it's a good spot for Anderson to come in here and pick off a woman she should not pick off and pull off an upset against somebody like Holm here, and then immediately get probably more credit than she deserves. And then, we'll see a potential matchup with Cyborg for Anderson as well, which would bode well for her. But with all that said, I still have to side a little bit more with the experience at Holm. I think she is the better fighter. I think as this fight progresses a little bit, obviously Holm can start pulling away when she gets more comfortable. She can adapt. She's a smarter fighter overall as well. So I think she has that in her back pocket. And I'm a little bit hesitant on picking Holm here, even though I am going to pick her to win because of the wars that she's been in lately. I mean, the fighters that she's faced, even though she's lost the last 4 out of 5 fights. That Tate fight, she was winning that fight. Obviously, we know what happened. Miesha Tate was able to get her back and choke her out there. So outside of that, though, Shevchenko was able to outstrike her. De Randamie was able to outstrike her. And very competitive fights, no doubt about it. But, I mean, and then she had that war with Cyborg as well. It just, mentally speaking, losing 4 out of your last 5 fights for Holm, I'm not sure where she's at because she was used to winning, obviously, all the time before this. So, with that said, she's not getting any younger. She's facing a powerhouse, a young up-and-coming fighter. That's why I'm a little hesitant here, because this is kind of a tough spot, maybe a weird spot for Holly Holm to be in here, facing a woman that she should normally beat pretty easy in most cases. So I think Holm does probably find the way to win, but at the price, I think it is a dog or pass situation. So don't bet Holm in this spot. I think Anderson, his power might be a little bit too scary to bet against right at this spot here. So that's my advice in this fight here. I think it's going to be a fight where we see Holm probably coming out ahead, but Anderson's power worries me enough that it's a dog or pass situation, honestly, because I think her aggression and power could have some success here against Holm. So the pick is Holm, but again, another spot where you got to be cautious.
And personally, I don't think you need to be that cautious. Megan Anderson is a legit featherweight compared to Holm. I mean, Anderson is going to have 4 inches in reach. She's going to be 4 inches taller. I mean, there's no way in the world that she could ever make the bantamweight division like Holm has. But that being said, I mean, Holm went out there against Chris Cyborg and held her own over the course of 5 rounds. She gave Cyborg by far the most competitive fight that she's had in, practically a decade. So, you have to give a lot of credit to Holly Holm. She is a tremendously talented striker, a very good counter striker, and I just don't think that Megan Anderson has the skill set to beat Holly Holm. When people beat Holly Holm, they are usually forcing her from counter striking and fighting on the outside and waiting for opportunities, and instead forcing her to lead. And Megan Anderson is not that patient. She likes to push forward. She has pretty good Muay Thai skills. She likes to throw heavy leather, get in her opponent's face, potentially work them over in the clinch if she can. She wants to get in your grill and she wants to throw down, and that's playing right into Holly Holm's counter-striking game. I mean, if Holm is at her best, she's going to be connecting with crisp right hands and circling out like she did when she fought Ronda Rousey. And against Megan Anderson, I think Anderson will be pushing forward, and she does have tremendous power. But, I mean, I don't think she hits any harder than Cyborg. And Cyborg connected pretty solidly with Holm on multiple occasions. And, Holm, while she got rocked, I mean, she didn't go down. And she recovered. And then she went on and was still able to survive all 5 rounds. And in a 3-round fight here, I mean, unless Megan Anderson connects with something crazy, I just don't see her winning this fight. I think that she pushes forward and she looks for opportunities, but she's going to be missing. Holly Holm's going to make her miss. and then Holly Holm's going to be stepping in and landing those right hands and strong kicks every time that Anderson does miss. And I think Holly Holm just does her thing, and even though she's the smaller fighter here, she just outpoints Megan Anderson over the course of 3 rounds. I don't think she can finish her unless Megan Anderson really walks into something, but I think Holly Holm does more than enough here to get the job done and win a decision. So my pick is going to be Holly Holm. Now moving up to the welterweight division for an interim title fight, we have Rafael dos Anjos, who is 28-9, taking on Colby Covington, who is 13-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Dos Anjos opened -190. They come back on Covington at +150. So not much respect for Covington on the opener. Right now, over at BetDSI, we're seeing -127 on Covington as the favorite. Dos Anjos is coming in at -103. So this line has been out a while, and it flipped with a lot of action steadily coming in Covington's way overall. Some sharp action mixed in there with, some obviously square action as well. So all sorts of money coming in on this fight causing the line to flip, but there is also action coming back on RDA. So a lot of times when a line seems to settle like this or flip like that, a lot of people think it's just totally one-way action. That's not the case. A lot of books are probably fairly even right now as far as where the money is, even though the line is still sitting where it is right now, with Covington as a slight favorite. So this is an interesting fight. I mean, since RDA moved up to welterweight, he's had nothing but success, and he's looked great. I mean, his wins over Safadine, Magny, and Lawler, especially over the former champ Lawler. In my opinion, I thought, man, how's he going to look? He's going to be undersized. He's not a very big guy for the welterweight division, but RDA has stepped in there against some powerful people. I mean, Safadine's not exactly a small welterweight, so, to be able to go in there and compete like he did against Safadine and win that fight was pretty impressive. And then following it up, and the destruction of Magny, I mean, beating him like he did there. And then on top of it, his biggest win was against Lawler. Lawler has great takedown defense, obviously. He was able to mix things up well enough and able to get some takedowns and just, come out with a win there as well, over the former champion that most of us thought was just one of the toughest guys to beat stylistically for him as well. So, I mean, what more can you say? The power and the size has not mattered. RDA has looked great at 170 pounds, but with all that being said, he hasn't really faced a guy like Covington all that much. I know when it comes down to fighting, let me just say this. There's no question here who the better fighter is out of the two. Dos Anjos, RDA is better in almost every area in mixed martial arts. I mean, the only area that he's not better at is the wrestling aspect of things. But in the submission game, you got to point to RDA, of course. In the striking game, there's no doubt who the better striker is in this spot. It's RDA. Even his wrestling's not bad. He's got good takedown defense as well. But again, if there's something to be said about maybe a place that RDA is weaker, it's definitely the wrestling here. And Covington is going to have some size on him as well. So, even though Covington's more of a one-trick pony in this spot here, and his striking has improved, you can say what you want about that Damian Maia fight. Damian Maia did have success against Covington on the feet. He was landing to the point where he cut Covington, of course, and, he was, again, landing it well sometimes in that fight, but Covington was absorbing those punches pretty well, and he was delivering some punishment as well. I mean, he was able to throw back. He was taking it, but he was also throwing and having some success, and it looked like the striking is evolving enough that it's actually going to get him by in most cases enough to be able to utilize his strength which is obviously his wrestling base. So I think that's what you're going to see here. I know that we're used to seeing again in the last fight, especially against Covington and Maia, Covington utilized his stand-up game because he didn't want to play the ground game so much with Damian Maia. Well, here, even though RDA has a pretty solid ground game, he's no Damian Maia on the ground either. So I know Covington's game plan is going to be to wrestle, to grind him out. That's the way we really saw RDA get beat handily. The last time he got beat by a wrestler was against Khabib, of course. Now, of course, that's obviously we know what kind of level wrestler Khabib is. But ever since then, I mean, really nobody has tested RDA in that sort of way until this fight here that we're getting with Covington. So that's why I do think it's intriguing. I mean, he got in there with Jason High. Jason High actually way back when, after he lost to Khabib, I'm talking about. So I think that was back in 2014. It's been quite a while. But I'm saying that because since then, Jason High was able to still take him down as well. Now, he ended up winning that fight. But nobody else has really tried the takedown route against RDA and to just maintain, relentlessly try to take this guy down and lay on him, drop some ground and pound, and just kind of grind him out that way. Well, Covington is going to do so. He's going to have that blueprint, and that's why I'm going to pick him to win. Even though he's a one-trick pony compared to RDA in this spot here, I still think that one trick with his size and his wrestling pedigree is going to be enough to give RDA fits here. RDA is a strong fighter. He's, again, a very complete fighter, but I think stylistically Covington matches up a lot better than most people think in this spot here. I think Covington's going to get the takedowns, and he's going to come away grinding out RDA and getting the W here, getting his hand raised. So I believe that Covington is the winner, and I can't believe I'm saying that either because, again, before research or whatnot going into this fight, I thought it was kind of a no-brainer. RDA is the better skilled fighter, but upon further review, I think Covington is probably going to give him fits, and this is just a bad stylistic matchup for RDA. If he's able to fend off the takedowns of Covington, keep this fight upright, and do what he does best in this matchup, which should be outstrike Covington on the feet and have success, man, I mean, RDA is definitely going to be a legit fighter, and he's going to be ready for a guy like Tyron Woodley. So we'll see. If he passes this test, I think Woodley's going to be in some trouble possibly in the next fight for him, but I don't think he's going to pass the test. I think Covington's wrestling is going to be too much for him, and we're going to see Covington versus Woodley down the road at one point. I think that's how it's going to play out. Crazy as it sounds, we'll see that fight. So I'm going to pick Covington to win. Again, not a popular opinion, but I think it's right. So we'll see how it plays out.
Now, I agree that if Colby Covington is going to win, it has to be with his wrestling, and he has to do it repeatedly and just hold Dos Anjos down, because I don't see any other area that he has a major edge. Rafael Dos Anjos is a significantly better striker than Covington. I mean, if you go back and, yeah, Colby Covington won his last fight with striking, but it was against Damian Maia, and Maia won the first round, in my opinion, at least outstriking Covington. He was connecting. He bloodied Covington up a little bit with his left hands. It's just, he's not a striker. And he repeatedly was shooting in for takedowns and gassed himself out. And Covington was just fending off the takedowns and then putting pressure on Maia and outworking him on the feet. Dos Anjos is not Damian Maia. I mean, Dos Anjos is a legitimate striker with superior combination skills, great power. Dos Anjos is going to light Colby Covington up in the stand-up. On the ground, Dos Anjos has an incredible submission game, but I will say that most of his submissions have come from top position. Like, he's not a huge threat off of his back, like with triangle chokes or arm bars or things. So I'm not quite as worried about Colby Covington just diving headfirst into something. But it could happen. I mean, he went for a takedown against Warlley Alves, and Alves has a tremendous guillotine choke, and that's how Covington got his lone career loss. So it is possible that he could dive into something. But if Covington's going to win, I mean, he needs to be taking Dos Anjos down, holding him down, wearing him out, dropping some punches, and just trying to keep Dos Anjos from getting to positions where he can be a threat. And clearly in this fight, the biggest position where Dos Anjos is a threat is in the stand-up. I mean, Dos Anjos has tremendous kicking ability as well. I think that he could really tear up Covington's legs and body. And then those combinations that he is capable of throwing. I mean, he has a significant output, solid accuracy, strong striking defense, and pretty strong takedown defense. Like Nick mentioned, the only guy that has been able to really overcome Dos Anjos' takedown defense and put him down and keep him down has been Khabib. Now, granted, that was at lightweight, so Covington is bigger, taller, longer, probably stronger physically than Khabib. So if Khabib could take Dos Anjos down repeatedly and keep him down, then it is possible that Covington could do it. But I don't think Covington is as good of a technical wrestler and has as stifling of top position. Plus, you got to remember, Dos Anjos, even though he hasn't gotten like bigger in terms of his measurables, he's packed on some muscle, and he's not cutting as much weight, so he's not getting as tired moving up to welterweight, because he's faced 3 legitimate welterweights already in his run. He hasn't been facing fellow lightweights that moved up to welterweight since moving to this weight class. He's been taking on some of the cream of the crop, including the former champion in his last bout. So I have a lot of faith in Rafael Dos Anjos. I definitely do think that Colby Covington will get some takedowns, but Do I think Covington will get takedowns over 5 straight rounds? No. I think at some point those takedowns are going to get harder and harder to come by. I think Dos Anjos is going to wear Covington down a little bit. And I think Dos Anjos really starts to light Covington up on the feet and hurt him and either get a finish late or at least a decision. So my pick is going to be Rafael Dos Anjos. Now this brings us to the main event of the evening. We have a middleweight title fight, a rematch between Robert Whittaker, the champion, who is 20-4, taking on Yoel Romero, who is 13-2. Now, Nick, where did this fight open, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Whittaker opened -150. The comeback on Romero at +110. This line's been out for a while as well. Right now, looking over at BetDSI, it's -237 for Whittaker. The comeback is +187 for Romero. So line margins have tightened up, but more action coming Whittaker way, and it's been a steady flow of action his way as well. So sportsbooks are a little bit heavier on Whittaker here, and the money has been coming back in on Romero, and it'll continue to come in that way as well. But people are laying the chalk on Whittaker, and it's a lot of times. I mean, obviously, it's you have two of the best middleweights in the world, and they're fighting for that strap. And based off the first result, it was a very competitive fight. Whittaker ended up having the better cardio that basically got him through that fight more so than anything else. I know he ended up getting banged up and was hurt in the first round, and he was able to still win that fight. So I think a lot of people are probably thinking, all right, Romero doesn't have much of a chance if Whittaker was hurt the first time. I think that's kind of the train of thought, that Whittaker should win much easier the second time around. But you know what? I think where the line is right now, it's kind of a little bit disrespectful towards Romero, to be honest with you. I mean, the guy is a special type of athlete. I mean, he's proven that. He's a silver medalist, I believe, in the Olympics, obviously, as well, and wrestling back in the day. He just had that special breed of athleticism, and it's obviously translated well in MMA. He's been effective with his explosiveness and his knockout power coming off of really tremendous wins. I mean, I know that he lost again that close competitive decision to Whittaker, but before that, you know, he beat Weidman, he beat Jacare, he beat Machida. You know, that Jacare decision, of course, was a little bit controversial or whatnot, but then he just followed up recently after his loss to Whittaker and got rid of another quality middleweight in Rockhold. So Romero's no joke at all. And I know that Whittaker, man, he's something special for sure. And it's great to see him accomplish what he did and the fighters that he's faced. I mean, again, you can say a lot of the same things. He also beat Jacare recently. He beat Brunson, you know, so he's beaten a couple of solid fighters on his way. He's looked great. I mean, he's got that tremendous knockout power. He's got great takedown defense. He's got that youthful, just everything about him, that youthful attitude. I mean, just the experience that he's gotten, because even though he's the younger fighter here, obviously, I mean, we're seeing Whittaker at age 27, Romero at 41, but Whittaker has a lot of experience at age 27 already. And I mean, what he's accomplished is phenomenal. So I think what you're going to see here is either fighter's capable of landing that one punch, obviously. I mean, they're both knockout artists, so they can both knock each other out. And we could see that play out at any time throughout this fight. One mistake, you know, one lack of defense, one lack of just, you know, not being in tune, could see the other person go out. So I think that it's definitely a dog or pass situation with Romero here. Even if Whittaker is able to win rounds or outpoint Romero as the fight progresses a little bit, any moment throughout the fight, like I said, either one of these guys can win. I think that is the case, especially for Romero. So for me, I kind of have to question Whittaker as far as his time off. It's almost been a year. He had a really bad staph infection, and, you know, he's fully recovered at this point, but he's going to have a little bit of rust. I mean, his last fight was against Romero, and that was, again, a competitive fight. Since then, like I just mentioned, Rockhold was defeated by Romero, and so Romero has an extra fight under his belt that he stepped in there on and took that fight and ended up, getting one of the best wins of his life. So I think momentum is kind of a little bit more on Romero's side. Obviously, he's going to be hungry to win this fight and, you know, kind of redeem a loss that he has on his resume against Whittaker as well. And with Whittaker's time off and coming from that staph infection and maybe not being his sharpest right now, I think everything's kind of pointing to a Romero upset here, honestly. So it'll be an awesome fight. I'm hoping it will. One thing I know is I find it hard to believe that this fight's going to actually go another 5 rounds and we see the scorecards. With this much power in the cage, I think we're going to see one of them eventually get through and stop the other person. So it would be amazing to me if we see these guys go 10 rounds and we see another decision. So I don't think this one does go to the scorecards. I can see enough power on display here that, again, I think one of them makes a mistake and gets caught and ends up getting finished along the way. But I think it's going to be Romero actually doing the finishing in this spot here. I think that people are underestimating him, and I think it's kind of disrespectful where the line is now. The opener, I think, was a lot more accurate actually in this spot here, and it should be a competitive fight with a slight lean towards Whittaker. So I'm going to go against the grain here, and I'm going to pick Romero. I think he gets the upset win, and I think he probably ends up finishing Whittaker before it hits the scorecards as well. So the pick is Romero.
And I'm going to disagree. I mean, the main thing here is this is a rematch. Robert Whittaker, even though the first fight was a little close, he did win the first fight. And you got to remember, I mean, the first minute of the first fight, Whittaker tore his knee. And on a torn knee, he fended off just about every Yoel Romero takedown, and he pushed the pace. He used that torn knee, planted on that leg, and landed repeated kicks to the body and legs of Romero. That was actually one of his best weapons in that first fight. And he still pushed a strong pace offensively and landed some heavy strikes while avoiding a lot of Yoel Romero's explosive power. I mean, it was a tremendous performance basically on one leg. But guess what? Robert Whittaker's leg is fine now. It's fully healed. He's ready to go. And I think what happens here is Robert Whittaker just fends off a series of Yoel Romero takedowns. I think that he controls the distance to avoid that explosive jumping knees and spinning back fists and all kinds of crazy stuff that Romero is capable of throwing. Because this guy is extremely powerful and extremely violent. And if he connects with anything really nasty, I mean, it could hurt Whittaker. But that being said, I mean, Whittaker hasn't even been hurt since moving up to the middleweight division. And he has faced some nasty fighters. And I mean, his defense has increased and improved just drastically since moving up to the middleweight division. People just aren't able to hit him with anything solid. And he instead is able to counter with just excellent combinations, heavy right hands, and he just is able to find those openings. I mean, he wore down Jacare, hurt him, put him away. I mean, and he's not just doing it with his hands. I mean, obviously people know him for his hands. He's got the awesome nickname Bobby Knuckles that he doesn't like, but he also has some excellent kicks. I mean, he's set up multiple knockouts now with those kicks. And I think that he can do some serious damage in this fight if he just continues to land those kicks. And while he was out with the staph infection, you got to remember, he got that staph infection while he was training for that last fight with Luke Rockhold. So, I mean, he was going through a training camp. So it's not like he's just been out of action sitting on his butt since the last actual fight that he had. This guy is still training and getting better. And you got to remember, Yoel Romero, as explosive and as ridiculous of an athlete as he is, he has to start getting old at some point. I mean, he's 41 years old. It's crazy. So I think with Yoel Romero starting to slow down just a little bit, but still being dangerous, and with the improvements we continue to see out of Robert Whittaker every time we see him in the cage, I think that Robert Whittaker wins this more one-sided than he did the last time. And I think that he eventually could put away Romero over the course of 5 rounds, maybe in the 4th round. So I'm siding with Robert Whittaker. I think he gets the job done, and I think he wins by knockout. So Whittaker is my pick. I think he retains the belt. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC 225. Now, if we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to BetDSI. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.